Great. So let's get started. So thank you for joining us today. I think this will be a really interesting webinar, a little bit different from, I think, our usual webinars where we focus more on the technology or the scientific side. So I'm really happy to have Sotirios Papathanasiou with us today. I think many of you know him already, but just a quick intro. Sotirios is a dedicated air quality expert and author committed to democratizing health through clean air initiative. As a leader of the global air quality standards, Go AQS, he works to unify the global language around air quality and establish universal science-based safety limits for indoor environments. With a focus on bridging the gap between data and public awareness, Sotirios has authored 4 books on air pollution for both adults and children and curates a popular blog. His research explores the intersection of IoT devices, low-cost sensors, and the startup ecosystem. A strong advocate for localized insights, he provides expert guidance on analyzing pollution data to ensure accurate, actionable interpretations for communities worldwide. So it's really a great pleasure, Sotirios, to have you with us. I think we know each other for a couple of years now. And so what we're gonna do today with the webinar is Sotirios first will give an introduction into Go AQS. Then I will talk a little bit on AirGradient's thoughts on air quality standards and also how we are implementing Go AQS at the moment into our products. And then we really want to see a very lively discussion and Q&A in the end. So please feel free during the first 2 presentations to put your questions into the chat already. Or you can just, raise your hand at the Q&A session after the second presentation. I think that's all from my side. So Sotirios, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. And yes, we know each other for more than 2 years, actually, over 5 or 6 maybe. So it's a pleasure to be here among all of you and share a little bit about my work. I see also Simon Jones has connected. He was actually one of the first person to know about Go AQS. So it's always a pleasure to repeat the same thing to him. So let me share my screen, my window actually, and go through a quick presentation of what is Go AQS, what we do. Go AQS stands for Global Open Air Quality Standards. I'm Sotirios, the founder and CEO of this organization. And our main objective here, our main aim is to establish and communicate air quality, specifically for the indoor space, with the public and the people responsible for buildings in a way that it's going to be transparent and easy to understand. Basically. And we are trying to do that by adopting science-based clean air quality standards, limits, recommendations from the scientific community and other bodies out there. Those numbers are a little bit outdated. So far, we are over 190 people from all over the world, from big countries like the US, the European Union, but also smaller countries like Trinidad, which is an island near Venezuela, or countries in Africa where you will think that air quality is not yet important for them, but there are people there working to establish a framework regulation around the importance of air quality in general. When we first started with Go AQS, we had to unify some things in order to be able to communicate air quality in a public scale. One of which is the units of measurements for specific pollutants, as in different places of the world, they use different values and units. Then the target limits that we wanted to adopt and give specific clarifications, because in many cases we saw that people misinterpret some specific number, like for example from WHO. An index. Currently, we didn't have any index for the indoor space apart from some efforts from some companies, but none of the governments out there had created an index for the indoor air quality. Then how we can communicate real time data from different devices, different platforms, and across different people. And finally, raise awareness around the importance of air quality. Equality, equity, flexibility, scientific rigor, and universality are our main goals every time we think about indoor air quality. I'm not gonna read here all the details. You understand what we are trying to communicate here. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, indoor air quality is really important because we spend the majority of our times indoors. Whether this is our bedroom or a gym or our office, school, we've spent our lives on those environments. So we need to make sure we breathe the best air possible. Air quality, indoor air quality, I have created an analogy here to say that it's like the iceberg. So in many cases, we see the peak, right, which is like the small portion of the problem, but underneath it, there are many things that we have to consider when it comes about the impact it has, especially poor indoor air quality. And here are some numbers that we have found and we share with you, like 3.2 million deaths are attributed to poor indoor air quality in 2020. We spent like 69 years indoors, now depending of how long you were able to live, but if you live like until 80, and lack of universal standards is the main problem that we're facing currently. Go AQS has three main pillars, which are the air quality limits. Those limits are designed in order for us to understand the impact has or not poor indoor air quality to our health in the indoor space, and are mostly designed for reports. So basically, after a day or a week or a month, we can create reports based on the numbers that we communicate with the public in order to determine if there was any effect on the exposure and health effects of the individual. Then we have the indoor air quality score, which is a proactive tool we have created in order to inform users, but also the automation systems inside buildings about possible issues with air quality and possible solutions on how they can fix it. If air quality becomes very unstable and very bad, we suggest people to leave that specific area, right? Because now we are talking about a threat rather than a recommendation. And finally, we have policies, indoor air quality policies, because we have to lay down some fundamental steps for governments, institutions, but also even for schools, that they do not understand what they have to do in order to fix indoor air quality inside those specific buildings. The Go AQS is divided in two main tiers, which is the starter and unlimited. The reason we have two tiers is because we want it to be as inclusive as possible. We know it's not easy for everybody across the globe to adapt very strict limits for socioeconomical reasons, maybe because technology is not available there. Akim is doing his best with his technology to reach those places as well. But in some cases it's difficult, right? So we have to take into account that specific group of people. And then we have the ultimate where we have limits based on health outcomes and protective limits, right? So here you can see the starter, two parameters only, PM2.5 and carbon dioxide, not very strict limits. I think everybody can achieve those limits in the interspace with those recommendations we give. And then we have the ultimate, where here we have adopted the latest and greatest, as in many cases I say, with limits for 7 parameters, PM2.5, carbon dioxide, ozone, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and radon. And currently we are working with our working groups on including information about other pollutants. It is very difficult to do so, but we try our best, again, by scattering the latest research from the scientific community. And finally, we have the score system that we have developed, only 3 tiers, because it was very important to make it as easily communicatable as possible. Blue, orange, or yellow, and red. Those colors were developed specifically in order to accommodate people with vision disabilities, specifically with colors, but also because we wanted to accommodate black and white color inside of those different levels or breakpoints. This is a little bit our trajectory so far. We were able to be at the United Nations to speak about air quality. Our members have represented Go AQS in many conferences around the globe, from the US, Europe, Thailand, in many, many places, even through webinars, recorded videos, magazines, and you name it. We've been there, we've tried our best. Some of our partners, non-profits and organizations for profits, that they have solutions around air quality, and they adapt or will adapt our recommendations in the future integrations. And that's all about Go AQS. And I'm very keen to hear your comments, questions after Akim presents his part as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sotirios. And I mean, we will continue with Go AQS, just from the AirGradient perspective. So let me just switch over here. So I labeled the presentation a couple of thoughts, because I want to actually bring you back to a little bit of a journey. So we started in 2019 with and not open source hardware, what we do since many, many years. So at that point, we thought, okay, we have to imitate, what the others players are doing, like Yuho or Kaitera or other people. So we went for the reset certification, which was probably a good thing at that point, because at least it gives a kind of minimum quality, that CO2 sensor, NDIR or something yeah. So I think it was helpful for us to start. We did both. Reset has basically a monitor certification as well as data platform. Data platform is a recurring subscription, and after 1 or 2 years, we didn't get any customer interested doing a reset certification, so we stopped this one. And then you see this long stretch without anything new until last year was basically where we heavily focused on our open source hardware approach, our home assistant community, a lot of research projects. We also launched the outdoor monitor. But in early 2025, we also thought, okay, let's look again into the build environment. And the main reason was that we felt, okay, there could be something interesting we can offer, which maybe some of the existing mainstream providers don't have when it comes to open platforms, for example. But we also felt we don't really understand yet how that space really works. So we became members of both USGBC Elites and as well as Works with Well. We are listed there at the moment. And this is actually up for renewal in 1 or 2 months. And at this point, we're actually not sure if we're gonna renew these more traditional standards. And I want to dive into this. So we also had a lot of conversations over the last 12 months with with people close to that standards, and this actually reinforced our struggles, I would say, with some of these mainstream standards. And I want to go through this a little bit. So, and I think that's where Sotirios and Go AQS is very similar to our belief, is that indoor air quality standards should be primarily about health. And if you look at the mainstream standards, I feel that the priorities are maybe in the wrong order, at least to my taste. So often these certifications are done for actually financial return or increase the value of a building. Often it's an advantage to have higher leases. That's they can demand because they can say, hey, this is a certified building. Often it's ESG branding, and then maybe at some point there's health and well-being of the occupants. and some sustainability ideas. So in many cases, health is not the primary driver, and this was something that we struggled with, like especially coming also from outdoor air quality monitoring, where actually health is the primary driver, I would say. It seems to be a little bit different on the mainstream standards. So what else do we have? We also feel that mainstream standards have an inherent conflict of interest. So they basically earn money through certification of buildings. So in a way, they cannot let too many buildings fail, because then their standard is probably not demanded anymore. And so they need to strike a certain balance. And the question is that balance leading to more healthy buildings or not? Or is it really health focused here? It's a bit like, I think, the same problem that maybe private universities have. If you demand a very high tuition, you probably cannot let too many students fail, because then you will suffer economically. And I think also often it's really about, especially these more comprehensive standards, it's like you can offset poor air quality with, some points in other areas. So is this then really a real performance at the end of the day? So this was something that we continue to struggle with, and even being a member of these standards, which actually cost quite some money, didn't really help us in that respect. So I think what's interesting is that Go IQS is really different in that respect. There's no certification business behind, so this inherent conflict of interest isn't there. It's no proprietary ownership model. And I think what we really like, because we work a lot with scientists, is really this kind of that the main base is really grounded in scientific knowledge. I think what probably needs to be developed a little bit further over the next couple of years, like how can this be possibly enforced? Are there incentives or motivation mechanisms to join, to have people adapt the standard? But I'm sure Sotirios will have some thoughts there later on in the discussion. And we also feel that the open source philosophy and transparency of Go AQS really fits our philosophy as well. And I think what's good is, I was skeptical at the beginning. I would say some or many of these points have been addressed in the meantime. For example, have some kind of governance around the standard and an entity. So now let's dive into a little bit what we did already on like supporting and implementing the standard. And the first thing we did, which is actually live on the website, is we call it Go IAQS Core Simulator. And the reason behind was that and you see that after this item, is that we want to we implemented the Go IQS Score into our widgets. And to do that, we really wanted to understand 100% how do they actually work, because actually the calculation isn't super simple, I would say. There are certain things you need to be aware of. So building that simulator really helped us to play around with different concentration levels. And then a big thank you to Sotirios, who actually checked us and helped us finding some bugs. So let's have a look. So you can basically go on our website. It's under basically our healthy buildings, and then Go IQS Score Simulator. And then we have a bit of an introduction. And here, let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller. So what you can do here is pretty simple. So you can say like, okay, let's say I have a PM 2.5 of 5 and maybe 1425 CO2, and then you see, like, you basically see what is your score and what's the dominant pollutant. And I really like the two widgets that were in the white paper. So we just kind of copy and pasted them pretty much and made them operational. And then there's a little bit more information below. So just to repeat the scores, also have what is actually the color here. But I think it's a nice touch with Go AQS. It's that it's colorblind friendly, which we often observe actually with people using more traditional standards, which they have problems distinguishing certain colors. And then a little bit more information and a link to the website and the white paper. So when we built this, and going back to the next slide, we actually felt I have to go one more step. So we have several applications that we want to implement the Go IQS, like basically calculation. One was the web front end that we started with, but I'm gonna come to the firmware in a second. So we felt actually, because the calculation is also not that simple that you can just have 2 or 3 lines that you can copy and paste. We felt, okay, it could be interesting to actually make or publish a kind of technical implementation of that score. So what it is basically it's the same code that we used for the simulator, and we just felt let's make it public so that other organizations or companies that want to implement the score can actually just copy and paste that. And that's something that we have as a on our blog actually as a technical paper. So you can go down here, and then it just describes exactly how it's implemented. And I think the important thing is basically this part here where we actually share the real code. And it's kind of like a library that should be very easy to copy and paste and then put into your own code base. And then also for the 2 widgets, that was actually more work just to make the HTML really beautiful. It's basically here. So that's something that on the website people can use already. And then we also implemented this in our dashboard, and I want to quickly show how that works. So if we go, this is actually my house here. I'm not at home at the moment, so CO2 levels are pretty good. And so we have something we call public displays. And there's one called AQS, and let's just go and edit this for a second. And then you have like a preview, so you can see like different like the different implementations, and then you can finish this, and then you can actually preview this. Let's just take the status display, for example. And then you see like the master bedroom at the moment is at the 7 with like 13 micrograms PM 2.5, 405 CO2, for example. So this is real-time updated that people then could implement into their website if they want. So this is already, we had a bit of delay in deployment, but it's live now for everybody who's using the dashboard. And then I think what will be more interesting, actually, if you want, you can just take a quick picture here and see what's going on in the master bedroom. I think this will be actually more interesting here. This is ongoing because with firmware we need a lot more testing and we have longer release cycles. But we actually struggled. Oh yeah, and I forgot one more thing. So one thing that really convinced us about the Go AQS score is that we always wanted to have a combination of CO2 and PM. And because we think that's actually the 2 most important indoor variables, and they're the 2 that are most robust to measure, let's call it this way, because TVOCs, for example, can be all over the place. I think many of you know it. And other gases are a lot more difficult to measure, especially in absolute terms. So, and we always struggled, like, how can we actually combine PM and CO2? And when I played around this core, actually the simulator with my co-founder, we felt, okay, this really makes sense. You know, it's a good combination if you have certain higher levels of CO2 or low levels of PM. You can really see it's very health-based focus. So we really like that calculations that are behind the score. And what we plan here is basically, I think many of you use our monitors. You know that you can change the LED bar either showing CO2 levels or PM levels, and we want to add basically a third options, which would show you the Go IAQS score. And luckily we have 11 LEDs available, so we should be able to cover all 10 scores and obviously all the different colors. So I don't have a release date for this, but I think a lot of people are looking forward to it, and we want to implement this. Yes. So my last slide here. So what I mentioned earlier, we are still kind of trying to make up our mind on the more mainstream standards. So it's something that we are discussing, and maybe it could be interesting, maybe hearing some opinions from your folks here in this meeting. We believe at the moment what we want to actively support is the AQS, Go AQS, especially I think the scoring model is something that we feel has been very well done. The ultimate one is probably a little bit more tricky with the gases that I think are a lot more difficult to measure, especially in absolute terms. So we have to see a little bit how this develops. Hopefully sensor technology is getting better over the next couple of years as well. And then we can see like what we can cover on that aspect. Yeah, so I will stop my slides here. Yeah, this was all from my side. Let me see if we have some, or any questions right from the audience before I look into the chat. Or maybe Sotirios, you maybe have some
I do
feedback.
have a comment about one of the slides where you were telling that the model of those traditional, let's say, green building standards, they have a bias because they try to sell a certification. This is not the problem for me, right? Eventually, you have to find a model in order to have a business around it. But the problem for me is that it's not always clear that air quality is the metric that gives you enough points in order to gain this recognition from the standard that they sell, right? Air quality is very important for me, right? So I want to make sure it is air quality that is driving that specific certification and not something else, which in general they talk about well-being, right? So they have a gazillion things where they can contribute in the final and total number of points in order for people to get that specific standard inside buildings. Like, for example, if one of the standards out there has a specific point for companies that they have employees not flying overnight, which is okay. I mean, it's nice. I don't want to travel overnight either, but it gives me a mixed understanding of the final outcome of the building, right? We are certifying the building, not what's happening outside of somewhere else of the building. Anyways, that's my thought there.
Yeah, I think we are actually pretty close here. Okay, we got a couple of questions. So maybe I throw some in from Janine. Formaldehyde seems to be the only VOC on the list. We have a major TVOC problem in our home. We are wood burner next door, terraced houses. What scope is there for improving TVOC in index? We use Atmo Pro 2 and are alarmed by the levels in the main bedroom via the chimney, likely from creosote built up in chimney and stove next door. Wood stored damp, yeah. I think that the question is, I think TVOCs are not part of this standard yet. Maybe you can
Exactly.
share
Yes,
some thoughts
deliberately
on that.
again. It's not part of the standard because we don't see cohesiveness among the instruments out there that they measure TVOC. Plus, there are no epidemiological studies around this TVOC number, which is a total, right, volatile organic compounds. Every instrument is measuring different arrays of those VOCs, so it's very difficult to have a limit, a number around it, where we will say we are protecting. Why? Because maybe I'm more susceptible to one VOC than someone else. So it's very difficult to quantify what is the number behind it, how it can affect individuals in a global scale, right?
Yeah, maybe I can add one thing. So I still remember that from the 6 years ago, my first experience with TVOCs was that I was playing around with microcontroller, had Sensei, I think SGP30 at that time. And then I want to test, does this actually spike? So I had a can of glue, and then I opened it, and yes, it spiked. I thought, okay, great, this thing works. And then on the table, because we are in Thailand, I had also sun cream. So I thought, okay, let's open the sun cream, and it spiked the same. Okay. And I thought, okay, so what does this tell me? I mean, obviously you put sunscreen on your skin, so let's assume it's not completely unhealthy, and then you have something quite unhealthy like glue. And coming back maybe to Janine's question, and I think that's besides agreeing with Sotirios that the absolute values are very, very difficult with TVOCs to measure. It's total. So it can be very harmful substance and very harmless. And I think peeling an orange will also trigger your TVOC. So what do you then make with that data? Because maybe it's sometimes you might know the source, sometimes you might not. Would that always mean there's something dangerous going on in your house? So I think it's a very complex metric. You need to really understand what's going on, and I think that makes it very difficult to use let's say, in a very simplified form, in my opinion. I think you really need to look at patterns and understand the environment, basically, where you are operating. Good. Then we have another questions from Natalie. The jump from B to C seems like a deliberate design choice. What was the reasoning behind skipping the rest of the alphabet and landing specifically on C? And was there any concern that it might feel too alarming? Actually, that's a really good question, because I actually don't know the answer. So
Well, it's not something complicated, rather than in some cases we think that maybe C, which is the next letter after B, can be acceptable, but for us it's not. So we jump all the way to the end to clearly distinguish that there is a difference there from moderate to unhealthy, right? Those two tiers. Then also remember that we translate everything into different languages. So the corresponding Z letter is going to be omega for Greek, for example, which also going to indicate the end, like you have to do something. There is no room for you not to act upon it. That's like the main reason behind it.
yes, I saw in the white paper actually already translated into quite a number of languages. That's something we probably need to
Nine
do.
languages, and
9
someone is working on another now.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have another question from Heike. We hope one day we reach a standard for PM 0.1. Nano Control supports the work as Go AQS ambassador for ultrafine particles. Yeah, I think ultrafine is a very interesting topic, and I'm sure, Sotirios, you have some thoughts to share on that as well.
I have. I met Heike in person last week in Switzerland, where we went to speak about ultrafines on a specific conference there. It's very difficult, unfortunately, at the moment to measure those pollutants indoors with low-cost means. Technology is advancing, of course, but we do have still some obstacles to overcome. One of the biggest obstacles for me when it comes to ultrafines is the noise those machines produce in the indoor setting, especially when we are trying to figure out what's the exposure in real time, real environment situation, right? You cannot stand being with those devices for a long time. They drive you crazy. It's because they have a pump inside which are noisy in general. So yes, we still have to wait, but also we still have to investigate it in any way possible. And I will share a little bit what we are doing. So currently we are writing a paper about ultrafines with some experiments we did, and specifically saying that those good practices that the WHO is recommending around ultrafines are not very clear, communications. As a communication tool especially. And the reason is because they do have a 24-hour average limit and a 1-hour average limit, but they don't say where you should use and what time of the day you should use, because when it comes to 1-hour limit, you can take a sample right here, right now, but is this the determinant point for your exposure of ultrafines? But the problem then it comes when it comes to 24-hour average time, it's not possible and feasible to have them in a real environment situation because of the noise. Plus, they are very hungry on energy. So I don't know if people want them to, plug them all the time on the wall and have them running. Some of them also require liquids in order to operate, right? Like water or butanol, which is a VOC. So who wants to have now a VOC source inside their houses? Let's hope the technology and companies out there see value and they continue improving what they already have in order for us to have better tools.
Yeah, maybe I can also share one thing. So we test all our monitors and with Pallas Theta as reference device. And we are still experimenting in our test chamber what test aerosol should we actually, what kind of smoke should we actually use? And we use a lot incense smoke. And when we started doing this, it was really interesting because we compared, we used the plant tower, which is a typical low-cost PM sensor that sees basically particle sizes, I think, from 0.3 micrometers up. And suddenly our Pallas could actually see, I think, from 0.1 micrometers up. And incense smoke actually has a lot of very, very small particles. So we saw a big, basically delta between the low-cost sensor and the reference. And then the question was, okay, how do we actually deal with this? I mean, there are no PM sensors in a suitable price range that go to that level. And we can see, okay, there are a lot of particles out there. Luckily, in many cases, there's a strong correlation with bigger particles as well. So that's why actually these low-cost sensors, even they don't see the full spectrum, still often give you also in ambient levels relatively good information. I would say. But I'm also really looking forward to see, yeah, the technology improving there. And then at some point, what is interesting, it actually came from one of our scientists. At some point, your particle might be very similar to the size of a molecule, and then, okay, is that still then unhealthy or not? Because we are surrounded by molecules. So it was an interesting philosophical question. It's probably a bit too much for this workshop, but the smaller you get, the more interesting it gets, definitely. All right.
Something else I would like to add here is this is the reason we are trying also to change our narrative or the way we look things from mass concentration to particle number count instead, where you can have a little bit more clarity about now the different sizes of the particle and maybe pinpoint better the source of the problem, as we know that submicron particles are mostly anthropogenic rather than natural produced. And I think technology in that specific area, is it available even in the low cost space? So it will be nice to see, companies exploring a little bit further that specific field of nanoparticles or submicron particles. And finally, size is important, but then we get hungry and we want more. And then we are talking about what's the composition of the particle, because not all particles are made equally or have the same effects on human health based on their composition. So then we would like to explore more, or if this is coming from a diesel soot particle, or if this is Sahara dust particle, which is totally different.
Yeah, so I think that was also like when we digged into PM, first we had tons more questions coming up before we found the answer. So it's a complex thing. I mean, I think especially with particles, it's not a gas. It's not. I talked about molecules before. It's so different. Also, just the size. You can have a very long and small particle like asbestos, or you can have something round shape. So what's actually the question of size? If you're interested, we have a number of articles on this from our scientists on why PM 2.5 is not PM 2.5. That's the title of the series. Let's continue with a question from, I think Katrin is next. Many thanks for the presentation. I'm working with a community group who has been looking at their personal PM 2.5 exposure using fixed AirGradient outdoor and portable Atmotube monitors. One question that the participants have asked relates to when air quality is indicated as poor or unhealthy, and ask how long, minutes or hours, do they need to be in an environment with poor air, such as that which exceeds the standard for it to count as exposure to poor air quality. Are you planning to clarify duration of exposure to air pollution in the standards?
So that's the reason we have two different things inside Go AQS. We have the limits, where we do have time exposure, like for PM 2.5 is 1 hour, and for some other pollutants are either 1 or 8, except for some others where we have thresholds, like CO2, radon, and formaldehyde. And then we have the score. The score is a proactive tool and works with real-time data coming from the instruments. And why we need that is because we need to take actions when we see that air quality is becoming poor. It is not use for me to know that after, let's say, 1 or 8 hours, the air quality was bad. There is nothing I can do. I'm already exposed. So we had to find a way to use, first of all, the technology we have in our hands, like the instruments from AirGradient, and create a tool in order to communicate in advance that information to the users, or, as I say at the beginning of the presentation, to the BMS system, the building management system. In some cases, we need to automate things, and not me opening, close the window, turning on or off the purifier, but having the building automatically managing those things for us in order to protect us from those rises and peaks of air pollution.
Great. Okay, Lucian volunteers to make one more translation. Thank you for this. And then we have Ramya. There are some studies that showcase CO2 greater than 1000 ppm are significantly unhealthy, especially nighttime concentrations. The moderate levels extending to 1400 ppm seems more relaxed. Is my understanding of 1000 ppm being the absolute max incorrect?
Yes, so there is a huge debate about CO2 on whether it is considered a pollutant or not. And you will see bodies like ASRE, publishing a specific paper out there telling about the fact that they are not considering CO2 as a pollutant. Some studies out there, there is a lot of debate as well with the scientific papers out there, because some of them, they say that they didn't take into account other pollutants that may accumulate inside the building those specific moments. So more clarification is needed from the scientific community in order to understand better the effects of those specific limits of CO2. From my personal experience, though, I will say that CO2 levels correlate directly with accumulation of other gases indoors. So for that reason, we wanted to keep them as low as possible, but as well protecting individuals with, suppressed immunological issues and so on, and also, pathogen transmission in indoor buildings and locations.
Yeah, thank you. What we have, Andreas, great initiative. Would you consider to publish reference code for Home Assistant to enable easy integration? Maybe I take that question. I think it's definitely, we know we have a huge community with Home Assistant enthusiasts, and I will check. I think it would probably be best to really integrate it into the existing integration so that you just see the Go IAQS score basically in your Home Assistant dashboard as you can see your PM or CO2 values. We already have I think the US AQI in there as well, which is basically a calculated number. So yes, I will make a note, and then hopefully we can integrate this. Great. And then we have a question from Gregory through LinkedIn. Interestingly, I didn't know we have a separate channel. Yeah. How is the integrity of the underlying data being validated before it's translated into a simplified IAQ score? Standardizing interpretation is powerful, but without consistent evidence framework at the measurement and decision level, we risk creating alignment on outputs that may be built on very different conditions. There's a real opportunity here to connect scoring systems with structured, traceable evidence protocols so that common language also reflects common ground truth. Not sure, Sotirios, if you have some thoughts, then I
Yes.
can also add something to it.
Yeah. From our side, we tried to see, first of all, we tried to see what's happening with other limits around different pollutants when it comes to an index. So we laid down everything we could find in order to compare on the why and how they came up with different values. It is very difficult, even for environmental agencies like EPA from the US. In many cases, they say, we took the annual limit and converted directly to an 8-hour average limit, and that's the only information they give you, which is very difficult for you to understand further what you have to do in order to understand if this is possible or not. And we've seen that not only from environmental agencies, but scientific bodies as well. Specifically, I will take as an example the PM 2.5. We used something that was already developed by some other scientific committee, specifically a project which was called TAIL. And we directly implemented the first tier, the first breakpoint for 10 micrograms per cubic meter as the upper limit of the breakpoint. It is very complicated, and I don't think also there is a clear definition of the how-to, if you like, even from the most experts out there.
Yeah, maybe I can dive in a little bit on the first part. How's the integrity of the underlying data being validated before it's translated into a simplified IAQ score? So I think that boils down to how accurate is the sensor data, basically. So I mentioned it earlier. I think I trust PM and CO2, and I want to dive in maybe first PM 2.5 specifically. I think PM10 is not very good for in low-cost sensors, for example, but I trust it because we do a lot of testing in-house. Every monitor that we sell has a test report. We compared with a European Union approved reference device, and that gives us a certain confidence that the PM 2.5 score is good. For CO2, I think it's a little bit more tricky. I think the sensors itself are actually very, very accurate, especially the optical NDIR sensors. But the problem is the automatic baseline calibration sometimes. So by default, our sensor has a 7-day automatic baseline calibration. That means it assumes that within 7 days it has seen fresh air, and then basically it calibrates back to that level because there's an inherent drift basically in these sensors. So if you have a room that never sees fresh air within 7 days, you might underreport your CO2 levels and potentially to a bigger extent. So what we do there is that you have pretty fine-grained configuration in the dashboard. So you can extend it to, for example, 30 days, but you can also switch it off completely and say, okay, I just do from time to time a manual calibration, you know, bring the sensor out, then calibrate it back to something around 400 and bring it back in. But this needs obviously some configuration. So I think there could be a potential bias in the data. And I think that's where we need just to make sure we inform the customers in a really good way that if they put this monitor in a basement, then they might need to adjust their settings, basically. Okay, so let's go on. We have a couple of minutes left. There's one from Simon. Don't forget oxidative potential of PM. Sotirios, you have a
No,
thought on
it's what
that?
I said earlier, that we become hungry and we would like to learn more about the PMs.
Yeah,
So now it comes out about the composition, what's the composition of those
yeah.
particles, and effectively what's the oxidative potential they have on their health.
I think what we often forget is that there are many, many, many more, probably hundreds of pollutants that we don't measure, which are in the air. We don't know about them, and they affect our health. So, and we probably look at a very, very tiny fraction of everything that's around us. Maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. Okay, from Janine, are there studies linking health outcome with optical particle count data rather than mass?
No, so that's our problem. We couldn't find anything. We do have particle counts, but for ultrafines, right? Which are totally different numbers from submicron particle sizes particles. So as organization, we also invite the scientific community research further that specific area. Like, for example, I know here in Madrid, for example, they are doing a study in some schools, and they are using indeed particle counting for those specific 0.3, 0.5 micron particles. And we are hoping to find something out from this specific study just because they're using those specific metrics.
Good. Then another question from Simons, and risk is not absolute for the individual with different vulnerabilities, not absolute based on activities, not absolute from exposure duration. At some point, it's a tool for interpretation by the user.
Thank you. Yes, I agree
Yeah.
with this statement 100%.
Good. Then from Lydia, have you used ASHRAE standards in developing the Go IAQS scoring system?
No, we haven't. We have used ASTRAE for one of the limits in well, yes. It was originally used for the limits, and then it's converted directly into the score system that we have, but it's coming originally from ASTRAE for formaldehyde. I'm speaking about formaldehyde. The 27
Good.
parts per billion.
Then one question from Juliana. Health studies need longitudinal population level exposure data linked with clinical endpoints. OPC networks are usually shorter term or small scale.
Yeah. As I said, hopefully in the future we will have more networks of OPCs, optical particle counters, in order to understand now a little bit the sizing of the particles. As I said earlier, I think they are feasible, economically speaking, to use those particle counters. They also have a standard that they comply, which makes your work, Akim, a little bit easier when it comes to implementing, a new sensor in a device. I think.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add here. I think we recently launched the AirGradient Go, like our portable monitor, and I think these health related impacts are getting more and more important, and to really make that gap or that bridge from data to health impacts, I think is with the communication actually and creating awareness is for us like the next big thing, I would say, and it's not easy, but it's something that I think we really have to work on and better understand, and yeah, and hopefully we are making progress step by step.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm at the end of the questions, and we have 3 minutes or 2 minutes left. So maybe a last question, Sotirios, from my side to you. Like, so what are the next plans for Go AQS? Anything interesting coming up, or anything you're working on?
Yeah, we are working on many things, to be honest with you, from scientific papers that we are writing to proposals in order to reach out organizations like UNICEF and other organizations out there, in order to make them realize that air quality is as important as other aspects of life, like, water and food. For everybody around the globe, it's very important to work hard side by side in order to raise awareness and continue evolve in that specific area. We are organizing events in the upcoming future in Africa with groups there. We organizing other events with people from Asia, possibly in Vietnam. I don't have many details yet, but there are some of the things that we have in our pipeline. And also continuing, evolving our standard, because I think a standard is like a living thing. More information is coming to the light, and we have to adapt to it without, though, changing things too drastically too fast, because then it becomes an obstacle for people that need to adapt and follow the guidelines. So that's from my side. And also, I would like to thank you once more for organizing this lovely event, this webinar, and all of the questions that participants shared with us. I think in many cases they make us think better on where and how we have to make improvements and continue our work.
So many thanks, Sotirios, for joining us. Super interesting webinar. We gonna in a couple of days have that up on our YouTube channel and link it in our website. And if there's still any questions from any of you, feel free to reach out. There's also a support form, or many of you know my email, and then I can forward it to you, Sotirios, if people still have a question. So many thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.
Thank you all.